On October 11, 2001, on a busy stretch of Interstate 75 in Georgia, the Miller family, John, Helen, and their two children, Luke and Claire, simply ceased to exist. They were on their annual trip to Orlando, a journey toward sunshine and manufactured joy, but they never arrived. For 15 agonizing years, their disappearance became a ghost story, whispered in their small farming community, a cold case file gathering dust in a forgotten cabinet. The official record was a blank page, filled only with theories and dead ends. That is, until a child's sketchbook, found by chance inside a discarded tire, revealed a truth more sinister than anyone had dared to imagine. How is it possible that the evidence of such a monstrous crime remained hidden for so long, practically in plain sight? Before we show you how a 7-year-old girl's innocent drawings unraveled a terrifying conspiracy, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and be sure to subscribe. Trust me, you won't want to miss the shocking chain of events this single accidental discovery set in motion. The story of the Millers is not just about a disappearance. It's about a carefully orchestrated web of lies that was torn apart by the one thing the perpetrators never thought to look for: a child's silent testimony. What you are about to see will challenge everything you think you know about justice, memory, and the secrets that can be buried just beneath the surface of our everyday lives. The Millers were the heart of their small Georgia community. John, at 45, was a farmer whose calloused hands told the story of a life dedicated to the land. His dream wasn't for himself, but for his children to have the college education he never did. Helen, his wife, was the family's anchor, a woman whose quiet strength and unwavering kindness were legendary among her neighbors. Their 16-year-old son, Luke, was a typical teenager, caught between loyalty to his family's farm and a yearning for the world beyond it, a world of engines and cities. And then there was Claire. At 7 years old, she was the family's light, a shy, imaginative girl who rarely went anywhere without her sketchbook, her own private world of colors and characters. Their final morning together was a portrait of ordinary American life. Helen meticulously packed sandwiches and snacks, a ritual born of years of tight budgets and long road trips. Luke grumbled from the passenger seat about his father's country music station, already dreaming of the day he could choose the soundtrack to his own life. In the back, nestled between suitcases and pillows, Claire was lost in her own world, her crayons gliding across the page as she captured fleeting images of the world outside her window. It was a scene of such simple, unassuming happiness, a fragile moment of peace before the world, as they knew it was violently and irrevocably torn away from them. For their family waiting in Orlando, these were the last memories they would cling to. The last confirmed sighting of the Miller family was at a dusty gas station just off I-75, about 150 miles from their destination. A clerk later recalled seeing their old Ford Windstar minivan with its hood up, a classic sign of engine trouble. John looked worried. Helen was trying to keep the kids calm, and Luke was peering into the engine with his father. It was then that another vehicle pulled up, a tow truck. The driver, described as a friendly, middle-aged man, offered to help. For a family stranded on the side of a busy highway, it must have felt like a blessing, a moment of kindness from a stranger. They gratefully accepted his offer. That act of trust was the last decision the Miller family would ever make. When the Millers failed to arrive in Orlando that night, concern slowly curdled into panic. Calls to their cell phone went straight to voicemail. By the next morning, John's brother Mark officially reported them missing. The initial police investigation was tragically flawed, hampered by assumptions and a lack of resources. The lead detective floated the theory that the family had run off to escape financial trouble, a baseless claim that cost them precious time. A week later, the Windstar was found abandoned in a parking lot in a different city. It had been wiped clean. There were no fingerprints, no luggage, no signs of a struggle, and no trace of the Millers. It was as if a ghost had driven it there. The mystery had officially begun, and for the next 15 years there would only be silence. The weight of not knowing descended upon the extended family like a physical illness. John's parents, once vibrant and active in the community, withered into shadows of their former selves, the unanswered questions eating away at them day by day. Every phone call, every knock on the door, carried a spike of hope that was inevitably followed by crushing disappointment. Mark, John's brother, became a man obsessed. He poured his life savings into private investigators, chasing down every rumor and supposed sighting. He followed false leads to truck stops in Texas and transient camps in California, each one a dead end that chipped away at his spirit. The ambiguity of the loss was a unique form of torture. Without bodies, there could be no funeral, no closure, just an endless gaping wound. The community of Oak Haven, Georgia, was never the same. Before the Millers vanished, it was a place where people left their doors unlocked, and neighbors looked out for one another. Their disappearance shattered that illusion of safety. Suddenly, the anonymous river of traffic on I-75 felt less like a symbol of connection and more like a conduit for darkness. Parents held their children closer, and a quiet paranoia settled over the town. The friendly tow truck driver became a local boogeyman, a cautionary tale whispered to teenagers about the dangers of trusting strangers. The Millers' empty farmhouse stood as a silent monument to the town's collective trauma, its fields slowly being reclaimed by nature, a constant, painful reminder of the family that was stolen from them. The police investigation quickly grew cold. Without any physical evidence from the van, detectives were left with nothing but the vague description of the tow truck driver. They interviewed hundreds of people, followed dozens of leads, but every path led to a frustrating dead end. The case file thickened with reports of unsubstantiated sightings, psychic visions, and cruel hoaxes, each one forcing the family to relive their trauma. Years turned into a decade. New detectives took over the case, reviewing the old files with fresh eyes, but finding nothing the original investigators had missed. The Miller family became a statistic, one of the thousands of unsolved missing persons cases in America. For the outside world, they were a faded headline, but for those who loved them, their absence was a constant, deafening roar. Meanwhile, life moved on, as it always does. The world changed in ways the Millers would never see. The rise of the internet, social media, and smartphones transformed the very nature of communication and investigation. Their case, rooted in a pre-digital era, felt like a relic from another time. There was no GPS data to track, no social media activity to analyze, no surveillance footage from 1,000 different angles. The investigation was dependent on old-fashioned police work, on memory and witness testimony, and in this case, there was simply nothing to go on. The trail had not just gone cold, it had been erased. For all intents and purposes, the Miller family had been swallowed whole by the vast, indifferent landscape of America, leaving behind nothing but a void. The first critical misstep in the investigation came from the very people tasked with finding the Millers. In the crucial first 72 hours, the lead detective clung to a theory that John and Helen had orchestrated their own disappearance. He painted a picture of a family overwhelmed by hidden debts, running away to start a new life. This narrative, completely unfounded, was a deep insult to a family known for their integrity and hard work. It also poisoned the investigation from the start. While precious time was spent looking into the Millers' finances instead of searching for a kidnapper, the real perpetrators were given a head start, allowing them to cover their tracks and vanish without a trace. For Mark, John's brother, this theory was not just wrong. It was a betrayal that created a chasm of distrust between the family and law enforcement. The discovery of the Ford Windstar a week later should have shattered the runaway theory, but instead, it deepened the mystery into an abyss. The vehicle was found in a long-term parking garage in Macon, over 100 miles from where they were last seen. Forensic teams descended on it, expecting to find clues, fingerprints, hair, fibers, a receipt, anything. They found nothing. The van had been professionally detailed, scrubbed clean of every trace of the family that had spent their last hours inside it. Even the faint scent of Helen's air freshener was gone. This wasn't the work of a family trying to disappear. It was the work of someone meticulously erasing an entire family from existence. The chilling precision of the cleanup sent a wave of dread through the investigators. They weren't dealing with an impulsive act of violence, but something calculated and terrifyingly efficient. In the vacuum left by the stalled police investigation, Mark Miller appointed himself the sole detective, a role that would consume the next 15 years of his life. His den became a chaotic command center, the walls covered with state maps crisscrossed with strings, connecting sightings, theories, and potential routes. He spent his nights on trucker forums and early internet message boards, chasing down whispers and rumors. He sold off acres of his own farmland to fund private investigators, each one promising breakthroughs but delivering only invoices and disappointment. His marriage crumbled under the weight of his obsession, and his health suffered. Mark was a man haunted, driven by a singular, agonizing purpose: to find his brother and his family, or die trying. He was living a half-life, permanently frozen in the week they vanished. For John and Helen's parents, the pain was of a different, more silent kind. Their grief was a slow-acting poison. Their small farmhouse, once filled with the laughter of their grandchildren, became a tomb of memories. Every holiday was a fresh wound. Every empty seat at the dinner table a testament to their loss. Helen's mother would often be found in Claire's old room, holding a half-finished drawing, her tears staining the faded crayon. John's father stopped working the fields, his body and spirit broken. They both passed away within 8 years of the disappearance, their deaths officially attributed to natural causes, but everyone in Oakhaven knew the truth. They died of a broken heart, of the corrosive, unending pain of not knowing. They were the 5th and 6th victims of the crime. The years that followed were a cruel parade of false hopes. Each time a news station ran an anniversary story on the disappearance, the phone would ring. Psychics called with vivid, contradictory visions of where the bodies were buried. Cruel pranksters would call, claiming to be Luke, their voices filled with mock terror before dissolving into laughter. The most painful lead came 5 years in, when a woman in Arizona swore she saw a girl resembling Claire at a flea market. Mark drove for 2 days straight, his heart pounding with a hope he hadn't felt in years, only to find it was a case of mistaken identity. Each of these moments was a miniature death, a reopening of the wound that never had a chance to scar over. The family learned to dread the ringing of the phone, to shield themselves from the possibility of hope because the inevitable crash was too much to bear. In Oakhaven, the Miller family's story seeped into the local folklore, becoming a cautionary tale for a new generation. The abandoned Miller farmhouse stood on the edge of town like a haunted relic, its paint peeling and its fields overgrown with weeds. Teenagers would dare each other to spend a night on the porch, whispering stories about the friendly tow truck driver who was really the devil in disguise. The disappearance had stolen more than a family. It had stolen the town's innocence. The sense of community safety, once taken for granted, was replaced by a quiet, lingering fear. People locked their doors more diligently, and parents watched their children with a new kind of vigilance. The Millers were gone, but their absence was a constant, palpable presence, a ghost that walked the streets of their hometown. By 2008, 7 years after they vanished, the Miller family case was officially designated as cold. The original lead detective had retired to Florida, and the thick binders of case files were handed down to a series of younger detectives who had no personal connection to the family. For them, it was a piece of local history, a puzzle with too many missing pieces. Media interest had long since faded, replaced by newer, more sensational stories. For the world outside of Oakhaven, the Millers were a forgotten headline. For Mark, this bureaucratic indifference was the ultimate insult. His family hadn't just been taken, they were being erased from the public record, their memory fading into a dusty file cabinet in the basement of the sheriff's office. The silence was deafening. The investigation into the tow truck driver had been exhaustive and ultimately fruitless. Detectives had cross-referenced every registered towing company in Georgia and northern Florida, interviewing hundreds of drivers. They created composite sketches based on the gas station clerk's hazy memory, but the result was a face so generic it could have been anyone, middle-aged, maybe a bit heavy, wearing a baseball cap. It was a description that fit tens of thousands of men. Without a company logo, a license plate number, or any distinguishing features, the lead was a ghost. It was the central pillar of the entire case, and it was made of smoke, Investigators knew that finding this man was the key, but with nothing concrete to go on, they were chasing a phantom on the endless asphalt of I-75. As the years ticked by, the cruel irony of timing became painfully clear. The Millers disappeared in 2001, on the cusp of a technological revolution that would have made their case vastly different just a few years later. By 2010, an investigation would have been aided by GPS data from their phones, a web of traffic and security cameras, and digital transaction records. But their case was trapped in an analog past. There were no pings from cell towers to track, no social media accounts to analyze, no digital breadcrumbs to follow. The entire investigation rested on human memory, which had proven to be fallible and incomplete. They had vanished into a blind spot of history, a final moment of American life before the world became blanketed by a digital safety net. 15 years after that fateful October morning, the case was little more than a memory. Mark, now approaching 60, was weathered and tired, his youthful anger having settled into a deep, permanent sorrow. He still lived in Oak Haven, a solitary figure who tended to his brother's gravesite, a simple stone marker he'd placed in the local cemetery, though there was nothing buried beneath it. It was a place for him to grieve, a symbolic anchor in an ocean of uncertainty. The town had moved on, and the Miller farmhouse was slated for demolition. It seemed the last physical reminder of the family was about to be wiped away. All hope was gone. The truth, it seemed, was destined to remain buried forever, lost somewhere along that lonely stretch of highway, a secret the American landscape would never give up. Then, in the sweltering summer of 2016, a single random act of cleaning changed everything. On a forgotten back road not far from I-75, an elderly man named George was clearing out a dilapidated storage shed behind his small, independent tire shop. It was a place where decades of junk had accumulated, a tomb of rusted tools and forgotten parts. As he wrestled with an old, cracked truck tire, intending to finally haul it to the dump, he noticed it was unusually heavy. It didn't slosh like it was full of rainwater. It had a solid, dead weight to it. Cursing the effort, he grabbed a utility knife, driven by a simple, practical curiosity. With a grunt, he sliced through the thick, weathered rubber, peeling it back to see what was hidden inside. He expected to find a brick, or maybe just hardened mud. What he found instead would resurrect a ghost. Inside the tire, carefully wrapped in thick industrial-grade plastic and sealed with duct tape, was a small rectangular package. George, his hands stained with grease and dirt, carefully pulled it out. As he peeled away the layers of tape and plastic, he uncovered a child's spiral-bound sketchbook. It was remarkably preserved, protected from the elements by its rubber tomb. He opened it, his rough thumb smudging the edges of the pages. The first few drawings were exactly what you'd expect from a 7-year-old girl. A lopsided house with a smiling sun, a field of colorful flowers, a stick-figure portrait of her family holding hands. He saw a drawing of a smiling man labeled Daddy, a woman labeled Mom, and a taller boy labeled Luke. A wave of sadness washed over him, though he didn't yet know why. He was holding a ghost's memories. He continued to flip through the pages, a silent journey into a lost child's world. There were drawings of animals, a birthday cake, and a trip to the beach. Then he reached the final page. The tone changed abruptly. The drawing was frantic. The crayon pressed hard against the paper. It depicted their family minivan, clearly recognizable, parked next to a tow truck. But there was a third vehicle, a sleek, black sedan, a Lincoln Town car that looked menacingly out of place. On its door was a strange, sharp-angled symbol. Next to the car stood a man, but unlike the smiling figures in the other drawings, his face was a furious black scribble, a void of anger and fear. It was a child's raw, unfiltered testimony of the last moments of her life, a silent scream captured in wax and paper. George stood there in the dusty heat of his shed, the sketchbook trembling in his hands. He was 78 years old and had seen his share of life, but he had never felt a cold dread like this. He knew about the Miller family, Everyone in this part of Georgia did. Their story was a local legend, a dark fairy tale. He stared at the drawing, at the scribbled-out face, and understood he was holding the key. This wasn't just a lost item. It was evidence. It was the one piece of the puzzle that had been missing for 15 years. After a long moment of stunned silence, he walked back into his small office, his heart pounding against his ribs, and picked up the phone. He dialed the county sheriff's department, his voice raspy as he tried to explain what he had just found inside an old tire. The call from George was initially met with the weary skepticism reserved for cold cases. At the sheriff's office, the Miller file was a relic, a multi-volume monument to failure. But the physical nature of the evidence was undeniable. A young detective, barely a teenager himself when the Millers vanished, was assigned to retrieve the sketchbook. He met George at the tire shop and listened to the old man's story. Back at the station, under the harsh fluorescent lights, he laid the drawings out. The older, jaded detective saw a child's scribbles, but he saw a narrative. He saw the happy family, the sudden appearance of the tow truck, and the terrifying black sedan with its strange symbol. It was the first new lead in 15 years, a voice from the grave, and he knew with chilling certainty that this was going to change everything. Recognizing the potential significance, the sheriff's department made a bold decision. They released a high-quality image of the final drawing to the public. Within hours, the story exploded. The haunting image of the black car and the scribbled-out face went viral, spreading across social media and national news networks. It was a story that had everything: a beloved family, a baffling mystery, and now a chilling clue left behind by a 7-year-old victim. The drawing did what 15 years of police work could not. It captured the nation's attention. Calls flooded into the sheriff's office. For Mark Miller, seeing his niece's drawing on television was both agonizing and electrifying. It was the first tangible piece of his family he had seen in over a decade, a painful reminder of what he had lost, but also the first glimmer of hope he'd allowed himself to feel. The breakthrough came just 2 days later. A phone call came in, not from a psychic or a conspiracy theorist, but from a retired state trooper living in a quiet community in northern Florida. He had been one of the original investigators on the Miller case, and the mystery had haunted him into his retirement. He saw the drawing on the evening news and felt a jolt of recognition. The symbol on the black car, he remembered it. It belonged to a now-defunct executive transport company based out of Atlanta. Back in 2001, the company had been on the periphery of their investigation, rumored to be a front for organized crime, but they could never find a concrete link. Now a child's drawing had provided that link. The Phantom had a name. The case wasn't just cold anymore, it was on fire. Armed with the retired trooper's information, investigators descended into the dusty archives of state business records. The name Apex Executive Transport was a ghost from the past, a company that had dissolved over a decade ago, leaving behind a faint paper trail. The initial search was frustrating, yielding little more than tax filings and articles of incorporation. It felt like another cold lead, a dead-end street, paved with faded ink and brittle paper. But the young detective who had championed the sketchbook clue refused to be deterred. He had a gut feeling, a conviction that the truth was buried somewhere in these boxes. He methodically scanned every invoice, every logbook, every piece of correspondence, convinced that a child's drawing couldn't be the end of the story, but rather the beginning. He was looking for a single name, a single transaction that would connect this phantom company to the real world. The first crack in the wall appeared in the financial ledgers. Tucked away among routine expenses for fuel and vehicle maintenance was a series of large, irregular payments made out to independent contractors. These weren't for drivers or mechanics. They were lump-sum cash payments with vague descriptions like logistics consulting and asset acquisition. One name appeared 3 times in the months leading up to the Millers' disappearance. An individual with a long and violent criminal record. A known enforcer for hire in Atlanta's underworld. His name was immediately flagged. A background check revealed no connection to any legitimate towing company. But his profile was a chilling match for someone who could orchestrate a roadside abduction and make an entire family vanish without leaving a single trace. For the first time, the faceless boogeyman from the gas station had a potential name and a history. The investigation then turned to the ownership of Apex Executive Transport. On paper, the company was a complex web of shell corporations and holding companies, designed to obscure the true beneficiary. But by cross-referencing old tax documents and property leases, investigators finally pierced the veil. The man at the top was Richard Sterling, a notoriously aggressive real estate developer based in Atlanta. Sterling had a reputation for getting what he wanted, transforming vast swaths of rural land into profitable commercial zones. He was a man of immense wealth and political influence, a figure who seemed to operate in a world entirely separate from the Millers' quiet, rural existence. The question that hung in the air of the incident room was as baffling as it was terrifying. Why would a powerful tycoon like Richard Sterling be involved in the disappearance of a small-town farmer and his family? While the police followed the money trail, a young journalist for a local newspaper who had grown up with the legend of the missing family began her own investigation. She decided to ignore the criminal element and focus on the one thing John Miller truly valued: his land. She spent weeks in the county records office, sifting through dusty property deeds, zoning maps, and development proposals from the early 2000s. It was there, buried in a stack of rejected municipal plans, that she found the answer. A proposal for a massive, multi-billion-dollar logistics hub, an inland port that would have brought thousands of jobs and radically changed the landscape of the entire region. The project's success hinged on acquiring a contiguous block of farmland. At the very center of that block was a small 80-acre parcel inherited by John Miller, a piece of land he had repeatedly and steadfastly refused to sell. The journalist's discovery was the Rosetta Stone for the entire case. The Millers were not random victims of a roadside predator. Their disappearance was a targeted, ruthlessly executed abduction. John Miller's stubborn refusal to sell his ancestral land stood in the way of a billion-dollar development project. Richard Sterling, a man who never took no for an answer, had found another way to acquire the property. The family's annual trip to Orlando, a predictable routine, provided the perfect opportunity to strike. The engine trouble was almost certainly sabotage. The friendly tow truck driver was a hired kidnapper. The entire event was a corporate hit, meticulously planned and disguised as a tragic, random mystery. The motive wasn't madness or passion. It was cold, calculating greed, hidden behind a corporate letterhead and a developer's blueprint. The investigative team now had a clear motive and a prime suspect, but Richard Sterling was a fortress, protected by a team of the best lawyers money could buy. A theory, no matter how compelling, wasn't enough to bring him down. They needed a direct link, a witness, something concrete that tied him not just to the company, but to the crime itself. They returned to the Apex financial records, this time searching for smaller transactions, for any payment that might lead to a weak link in the conspiracy. They focused on payments made to accounts in or near Oak Haven, hoping to find the source of the leak, the person who told the kidnappers exactly when and where the Millers would be. They found it, a series of monthly payments to a local bank account disguised as consulting fees. The name of the account holder sent a wave of sickness and betrayal through the entire department. The account belonged to a sitting county commissioner, a man who had built his career on the image of a trustworthy public servant. He was a pillar of the community, a familiar face who had publicly mourned the Millers and offered words of comfort to their shattered family for years. He had known John Miller since they were boys. The bank records were undeniable proof of the ultimate betrayal. For a few $1,000s, he had sold out his old acquaintance and his family, providing Sterling's organization with their travel dates, their route, and the make and model of their minivan. He was the insider, the Judas who had delivered them to their fate. The conspiracy was no longer an abstract evil from a distant city. It had a face, and it was one they all recognized. The darkness wasn't just on the highway. It had been sitting in their town meetings all along. With the county commissioner in custody, a wave of revulsion swept through Oak Haven. The man they had trusted, who had shaken their hands and offered condolences, was a key player in the town's greatest tragedy. Facing a lifetime in prison, His facade of community leadership crumbled within hours of interrogation. He gave up everything. He provided investigators with the real name of the man hired to abduct the Millers, a former dock worker and enforcer named Frank Coleman. The friendly tow truck driver, the phantom who had haunted their nightmares for 15 years, finally had a name. The commissioner also confirmed the motive, laying out the entire conspiracy orchestrated by Richard Sterling to seize John Miller's land. He admitted to providing the travel schedule, the route, and the details of the minivan. For a few $1,000s a month, he had signed a death warrant for an entire family. The search for Frank Coleman became a desperate race against time. He was in his late 60s now, and his trail had gone cold years ago. Investigators dug through old addresses, employment records, and known associates. They finally got a hit from a Social Security payment being sent to a small, run-down trailer park in coastal Mississippi. When two Georgia detectives, accompanied by local law enforcement, pulled up to his rusted single-wide trailer, they weren't met with the hardened criminal they expected. The man who answered the door was a shell of a human being, frail, emaciated, and breathing with the help of an oxygen tank. Frank Coleman looked like a ghost himself. There was no fight in his eyes, only a deep, hollowed-out resignation. When the detectives told him who they were, he simply nodded, as if he had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. In a sterile interrogation room at the local sheriff's office, Frank Coleman began to talk. His voice was a rasp, broken by fits of coughing, but the words flowed with a chilling clarity, a story he had clearly replayed in his mind 1,000,000 times. He confessed immediately. He explained that sabotaging the Miller's van was simple. A small, undetectable cut in a fuel line made hours before they left. He recounted waiting for them at the gas station, playing the part of the concerned local, offering a helping hand. He remembered Helen Miller thanking him, her voice full of genuine relief. He remembered John shaking his hand, the firm, trusting grip of a man who believed in the kindness of strangers. And he remembered seeing the two children in the back seat, Luke looking bored, and Claire quietly drawing in her sketchbook, oblivious to the fact they were being led into a trap. He then described the terrifying turn of events. Instead of taking the highway exit to a repair shop, he drove them down a series of unmarked dirt roads, deeper and deeper into the Georgia wilderness. The family's confusion slowly turned to fear. Helen started asking questions, her voice trembling. John demanded to know where they were going. Coleman said he ignored them, his orders clear. They arrived at a remote foreclosed property, a dilapidated farmhouse surrounded by acres of untamed woods. Waiting for them was the black Lincoln Town car from Claire's drawing, and 2 other men, enforcers on Richard Sterling's payroll. The Millers were forced out of their van, at gunpoint. It was then, he said, that the family understood this wasn't a simple breakdown. It was an abduction. Their journey to a place of joy had ended in a place of unimaginable terror. Inside the decaying farmhouse, the true horror began. Coleman detailed how John Miller was separated from his family and taken into the barn. For hours he was beaten and tortured. They didn't want his money. They wanted his signature on a stack of legal documents, the deeds to his land. Coleman watched as John, bloodied and broken, refused to sign. He told them they could kill him, but he would never give up his family's legacy. He pleaded for them to let his wife and children go. The enforcers, frustrated by his defiance, brought Helen, Luke, and Claire into the barn, forcing them to watch, believing it would finally break him. But even then, faced with the terror of his family, John Miller refused. His last act on this earth was one of stubborn, desperate, paternal love. He would not surrender. When it became clear that John would never sign, a call was made. The order came back, cold and simple: leave no witnesses. Coleman's voice cracked as he described what happened next. The enforcers, acting with brutal efficiency, murdered the entire family, one by one. He recounted how he was forced to help bury their bodies, a task that took the rest of the night. They weren't just hidden, they were entombed. The killers had brought bags of concrete with them. The bodies of John, Helen, Luke, and Claire were placed in a deep pit dug into the floor of the barn, which was then filled with cement, becoming a permanent, unmarked grave. The next day, the property was cleaned, the minivan was wiped and abandoned, and the men involved were paid in order to disappear. The secret, they believed, was buried forever under tons of solid stone. The confession was a brutal, soul-crushing narrative, but it provided the one thing investigators had lacked for 15 years: a location. Frank Coleman, his story finally told, seemed to shrink in his chair, the last of his energy spent. He took a pen in his trembling hand and drew a crude map on a legal pad, marking the dirt roads and the abandoned farmhouse with the barn. Within the hour, a convoy of state police cruisers, forensic vans, and heavy excavation equipment was speeding towards the location he had described. Mark Miller received a call from the lead detective. His voice was grave. "Mark," he said, "we have him." He confessed, "We think we know where they are." After 15 years of agonizing silence, the ground was finally about to give up its dead. The long wait was almost over. The scene at the abandoned farmhouse was one of somber, methodical purpose. Under the harsh glare of portable floodlights that cut through the Georgia twilight, a team of forensic experts and state investigators watched as an excavator's heavy claw broke through the concrete floor of the old barn. The air was thick with the dust of decades and a palpable tension. Mark Miller stood at the police cordon, a solitary figure wrapped in a borrowed jacket, his face a mask of exhaustion and dread. For 15 years, he had imagined this moment in 1,000 different ways, but the reality was a slow, grinding procedure. Then, a shout from one of the workers. The digging stopped. A forensic anthropologist descended into the pit. After a long, silent moment, she looked up, her expression confirming what they all knew. They had found them. The long, agonizing search for the Miller family was finally over. The trial of Richard Sterling and the disgraced county commissioner was a media sensation, a modern-day David and Goliath story that captivated the nation. Sterling, clad in bespoke suits, projected an aura of untouchable arrogance, his high-powered legal team attempting to dismiss the entire case as a fantasy built on the ramblings of a dying old man. But the evidence was overwhelming. The financial records, the commissioner's tearful confession on the stand, and Frank Coleman's video deposition, recorded just weeks before his death, painted an irrefutable picture of cold-blooded corporate greed. But the most powerful testimony came from a witness who could not speak. When the prosecutor projected a large image of Claire's final drawing onto the courtroom screen, a collective gasp filled the room. The scribbled-out face, a child's rendering of pure evil, became the silent, damning indictment that sealed Sterling's fate. The sentences were swift and severe. Richard Sterling and the former commissioner were found guilty on all counts, including conspiracy, kidnapping, and 4 counts of first-degree murder. The judge, in his final statement, condemned their actions as a, quote, cancer of greed that rotted the soul of a community. Both men received multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole, destined to spend the remainder of their days behind bars. They showed no remorse. Frank Coleman, the instrument of their evil, never faced a jury. He died of emphysema in a prison infirmary 2 months after his confession, his body finally giving out. His final act was not one of redemption, but of a man unburdening himself from a secret that had eaten him alive for 15 years, a haunting final chapter to a life defined by a single, monstrous act. Weeks later, the entire town of Oak Haven gathered under a gray, overcast sky to finally lay the Miller family to rest. The 4 caskets laid side by side represented the end of a long, collective nightmare. For 15 years, the Millers had been a ghost story, an abstract tragedy. Now they were home. The service was a testament to a community healing a wound that had been left open for far too long. For Mark Miller, it was the most difficult day of his life, but it was also the first day of a new, quieter kind of grief. He was no longer a detective chasing shadows. He was a brother and an uncle mourning his family. As he placed a single white rose on each casket, the crushing weight of not knowing was finally lifted, replaced by the profound, definite sorrow of loss. The Miller family story became a catalyst for change. Their brutal murder, born from a developer's insatiable greed, ignited a national conversation about the ethics of land acquisition and the bullying tactics used by powerful corporations against ordinary citizens. Advocacy groups, armed with the tragic narrative of John Miller's final, defiant stand, lobbied state lawmakers for reform. A year after the trial, the governor signed into law a landmark piece of legislation designed to protect small landowners from predatory practices. It was officially named Clare's Law. In a deeply tragic irony, John Miller's refusal to surrender his family's legacy, the act that cost him everything, ultimately created a shield to protect countless others. His sacrifice and that of his family had not been in vain. Today, on the outskirts of Oakhaven, there is a small memorial park where the Miller farmhouse once stood. It's a quiet place, with a playground and a few simple benches. At its center stands a bronze plaque, and etched into its surface is a perfect replica of Clare's final drawing. It is a haunting, powerful reminder of how the innocent testimony of a 7-year-old girl unraveled a web of darkness and brought justice to a family that had been stolen from the world. Mark Miller is often seen there, sitting quietly, watching a new generation of children play. The ghosts of his past have not vanished, but they no longer scream for justice. They whisper of love, of sacrifice, and of a truth that, against all odds, refused to stay buried. If you believe that no victim should be forgotten and that the search for truth is essential, please share this video. Don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth investigations into cases that need to be told. Thank you for listening. The end of the trial did not bring celebration. It brought a profound, heavy silence. For Mark Miller, the relentless noise of his 15-year crusade for answers was finally over, replaced by the quiet, personal grief he had never been allowed to fully process. The national media moved on to the next sensational story, but in Oakhaven, the reality of the loss settled in permanently. There were no more theories to chase, no more false leads to break his heart. There was only the stark, cold truth. Mark could finally visit a real gravesite, a place of certainty, and speak to his brother, not as a missing person, but as a memory. His war was over, but the peace he found was somber, a landscape forever scarred by the battle he had been forced to fight alone for so long. The town of Oakhaven chose not to erase its wound, but to transform it into a lesson. The land where the Miller farmhouse once stood, the starting point of their stolen journey, is now a community park. It's a place of laughter and life, where children run freely. In the center, a simple bronze plaque is set in stone. It bears no grand epitaph, only a perfect etched replica of Clare's final drawing, the minivan, the tow truck, and the black car with its scribbled-out face. It serves as a permanent, chilling reminder that evil can wear the mask of a friendly stranger, and that the most powerful testimony can come from the smallest voice. The memorial isn't just about mourning the Millers. It's about honoring the quiet, innocent truth that refused to stay buried. A warning and a promise for generations to come. The legacy of the Miller family extended far beyond the borders of their small town. John Miller's final act of defiance, his refusal to sign away his family's land even under torture, became a powerful symbol. Spurred by the national outrage over the case, a coalition of advocacy groups and lawmakers drafted new legislation. Clare's Law was passed a year later, creating stringent protections for small landowners against coercive tactics by large corporations. It established criminal penalties for developer-led intimidation and closed legal loopholes that had allowed men like Richard Sterling to operate in the shadows. In a final, heartbreaking irony, John Miller's fierce protection of his 80 acres ended up creating a legal shield for thousands of families across the country. He lost his life defending his legacy, but in doing so, he secured the legacies of countless others. In the end, this was not a story about a brilliant detective or a high-tech investigation. It was a story about the enduring power of a child's memory, captured in wax on a cheap piece of paper. Clare Miller's sketchbook did what 15 years of police work, private investigators, and desperate searching could not. It cut through a sophisticated conspiracy woven with money, power, and fear, Her simple, honest rendering of the events was the one thing the killers never accounted for. They could scrub a crime scene, silence witnesses, and bury their victims under tons of concrete. But they couldn't erase the truth as seen through the eyes of a 7-year-old girl. Her drawing was more than a clue. It was a ghost reaching out from the past, a silent scream that ultimately became a roar for justice. The story of the Miller family is a testament to the fact that no secret is buried forever, and that the quietest voices often carry the most profound truths. It reminds us that behind every cold case file is a family frozen in time, waiting for an answer that may never come. If you believe that every victim deserves to be remembered, and that the pursuit of justice is a fight worth fighting, please share this story. Subscribe to our channel for more investigations into the cases that demand to be heard. Thank you for bearing witness.